Thank you so much, Claire, for the introduction. Good morning to you. Good morning to everyone. Kia ora. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person, but it is a pleasure and an honor to join you virtually at the happy occasion of the founding assembly of the first Queer History Month in New Zealand. My thanks to Claire O'Leary and Ruben Love for coordinating my being here today. And thank you to the National Library of New Zealand and the Queer Archives of New Zealand for organizing this special and historic event. My congratulations to Dr. Elizabeth Kirikiri on the new role of Chair of the Board of Trustees of the Queer Archives, the newly renamed Queer Archives. What the National Library and the Queer Archives are doing is calling into existence an occasion, a commemoration, a celebration, an opportunity that will come around every year. Everyone here today is putting Queer History Month on the calendar, quite literally. With the breath of life breathed into this ritual, the idea will be adopted and adapted by secondary schools and colleges and universities, community groups, academic associations, archives, and libraries all over New Zealand, each marking the annual time according to their own needs and their own visions and resources and interest. History months exist because something has been lacking, something has been missing, something has been left out, ignored, neglected, burned in the fireplace after someone's death. In the United States, the first ever History Month, the origin of all history months, began in 1926. This man, Dr. Carter Woodson, was a historian and scholar of astounding intellect and social organizing capacity. He was the second African American ever to earn a PhD at the United States' oldest institution of higher education, Harvard University, and the only person ever to earn that degree at that university who was the child of a formerly enslaved mother and father. Dr. Woodson had been inspired, energized, revolutionized by learning the history of Americans of African descent. Until he understood his place in the world and his ability to integrate himself into the world, he was not able to lead a fully contented and successful life. The study of the past set him free. It liberated his spirit from the lowly position mandated by white America. Frankly, Black American history in the United States 100 years ago did not exist in the minds of white Americans. They were too burdened by ignorance and racist hearts. It did not exist in the minds of many Black Americans either. Along with names and languages and religions and cultures and families obliterated by the slave trade, history was lost too. Dr. Woodson wanted to change all that, to right what was wrong. Toward that end, in 1926, he founded Negro History Week. 10 years prior, he co-founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History and began publishing the Journal of Negro History. Negro History Week would be a time for intentional reflection on Black history, the meaning of Black history, the purpose of Black history. He placed the commemoration in February to coincide with the birthdays of the great formerly enslaved abolitionist and mesmerizing orator Frederick Douglass and the emancipator president Abraham Lincoln. Dr. Woodson believed in the power of history. As he wrote in 1933, the conditions of today have been determined by what has taken place in the past. And in a careful study of this history, we may see more clearly the great theater of events in which the Negro has played a part. Negro History Week remained an annual week-long commemoration in the United States for decades. These images are from the mid-1940s with President Truman's endorsement. 2 years before Truman integrated the armed forces and almost 20 years before congressional passage of the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act, both of which transformed American society. Woodson's Black Studies Association, his books, his scholarly journal, and Negro History Week became avenues through which the omissions and gaps in the historical record of the United States could be rectified, primarily for African Americans and secondarily for white Americans. Some might be asking now, what does this have to do with New Zealand in 2024? Well, as we know, the post-World War II period was one of righteous unrest among many marginalized peoples in the United States, in New Zealand, and around the world. Colonial yokes were thrown off. Second-class citizens demanded first-class rights. Multiple civil rights movements arose. This group inspired that group, and the means and methods and tactics and strategies that worked for one people were adopted by others. Previously unrecognized and unstudied groups, women, indigenous people, LGBTQ, began to demand inclusion in the classroom, in textbooks, in government, and in culture. In the United States, for example, one ethnic and identity group after another adopted Dr. Woodson's teaching about the importance of Black history and applied it to their own groups' histories. In 1968, Latin Americans living in California founded National Hispanic Heritage Week, which expanded into a month-long celebration, just as Negro History Week had done. A few years after Hispanic Heritage Month was founded, Asian and Pacific Islander Americans marked their own Heritage Month. In California in 1978, the first Women's History Week was organized. It's now Women's History Month, every March. In 1986, Native American groups in the United States claimed November as Native American Heritage Month. Many others have grabbed hold of Dr. Woodson's idea and applied it to themselves and placed their own history and their own people on the calendar and in the record, jostling their way into the conversation about personal, group, and national identities, challenging the view that history is mostly or only white or male or straight, and decrying monolithic history teaching as social and educational malpractice. The mandate of these celebratory occasions is highlighting and publicizing long neglected stories. They are about saving the past. They also, of course, are political actions, because it is political to claim that one's group has a history, that one's group is part of the national narrative, and that one's group has a right to see their people's stories reflected in what Dr. Wilson called the great theater of events. All of which brings me to 1994. 30 years ago, I was a young, new teacher and an out teacher. I was teaching at a suburban secondary school outside of St. Louis, Missouri, in the middle of the country, the heartland, we like to call it. And I wanted for LGBTQ Americans what Dr. Wilson had wanted for African Americans. That is, to energize the preservation and proliferation of LGBTQ history. This book is why. It's a late 1980s edition of a commonly used high school American history textbook, the book my students were issued in my classroom. It's an 800-page survey of the story of the United States: indigenous, exploration, colonial, revolutionary, early republic, Civil War, Reconstruction, the World Wars, confrontation with the USSR, and the 20th century. It's all there. But in 800 pages, there is no reference, not one, to any LGBTQ person or event. Queer people were not erased in this textbook. They were never even there to be erased. They were not part of the story, not at all. That is the message this book preaches. It infuriated me. You can see here that I wrote plus homosexuals into the story by means of a margin note, stinging from the exclusion of my own community, from my own classroom textbook, and from history generally. In January 1994, I sent a letter to all then known queer organizations in the United States, writing of my desire to establish October 1994 as what was initially called Lesbian and Gay History Month. I selected October for 4 reasons. October falls within the U.S. academic year, which runs about mid-August to mid-May. October was free of major conflicting events. It was the month during which both the first and second marches on Washington were held in 1979 and 1987, and October 11th had been designated National Coming Out Day since 1988. October made sense for this new History Month. Endorsements came rolling in. Most all the LGBTQ civil rights and education and advocacy organizations of the day endorsed the plan. A national coordinating committee was organized. We gathered resources, bibliographies, essays, and activity recommendations and created a curriculum packet. Film festivals and conferences were organized. There was controversy, of course. One conservative Indiana congressman on the floor of Congress shouted that parents should scream bloody murder about this new History Month. The head of a conservative women's group wrote to her followers that every Christian parent in America will view this official observance of homosexuality as a direct assault on innocent, unsuspecting children. 30 years later, LGBTQ plus History Month in the United States is a well-established community occasion. Last October, for example, Syracuse University in New York put 25 History Month events on their university's calendar. Equality Forum since 2006 has recognized 558 queer icons, 31 every October for 18 years. And LGBTQ Nation has published hundreds of queer history stories on their website over the past decade. Beginning in 2005, the idea of a history month devoted to queer history jumped the pond to the United Kingdom, then to Romania and Canada and Hungary and a dozen other locations. In 2021, I learned of the effort to establish a History Month Italy. I contacted that group of half a dozen Italians who were spearheading the movement. During our email conversations, I suggested we create an international committee on LGBTQ plus history months. The Italy team agreed it would be a good means of disseminating information and helping other locations adopt the idea. Our first meeting was held in January 2022. Roger Smith, 2 down and 2 over, represented New Zealand and the Queer Archives. When he stepped down to finish his doctoral work, Claire O'Leary, top row 4 across, joined the committee. We meet quarterly. We encourage more history months all over the world. We're currently working with representatives in Spain and Brazil about launching their own history months in 2025. In 2022, Italy in April, Cuba in May, a French language effort in June, and Uganda in October became the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th locations with a Queer History Month. Historians, teachers, activists, and archivists within the LGBTQ communities in these locations created something new for their national queer life. A History Month, precisely as Dr. Carter Woodson planned it in 1926, hands a megaphone to these precious stories. Knowing our history makes us better, wiser, stronger, and more secure in our own beings and personalities. History gives young people a narrative in which they themselves can walk, a story in which they themselves can write their own chapters. It gives them a foundation, a boost, and a shoulder from which to see their lives as part of an endless stream of humanity yearning to breathe free. History months are a vocal insistence that we won't be silent again. History months are the opposite of silence. They are a firm assertion that every human being has a right to their history, to their stories, to their people. Today marks the moment when New Zealand joins the Queer History Month Club as the 20th History Month in the world. That this is happening on the 38th anniversary of the passage of the Homosexual Law Reform Act, which was a hard-fought battle against conservative forces and a narrow victory for LGBTQ rights in New Zealand, is inspiring. The entire International Committee was thrilled to learn that the Queer Archives, which itself is older than every Queer History Month in the world, and the National Library were collaborating to create a new National Queer History Month. Everyone in this room is thrilled too. From the bottom of my heart, congratulations, and thank you for allowing me to be a small part of this remarkable day. Thank you.